So when I have had conversations with people all over the country about the co-op and Nelson and our food culture here, people are always utterly perplexed.
There was no other grocery store owned by its customers of that scale that was as focused on community and focused on buying guidelines and product standards. Nothing else was like it in the country.
When you walk into the store, you really get the sense that the staff who work here really want to be here. And that really creates this beautiful, unique shopping experience that makes you just kind of want to hang out a little longer. It really makes groceries seem like not such a chore anymore.